Hey all, back this week to talk with you about part 2 of the P.E.A.C.E series. Hope you're finding these to be helpful. I know it's kind of dry, but believe me, when you're in a situation dealing with these types of issues, it's helpful to kind of have some idea of what the pieces are on the board that you're playing with. So last week we talked about parental responsibility and time sharing, or P in the P.E.A.C.E acronym. This week we're going to be talking about the E in the P.E.A.C.E acronym for equitable distribution. The phrase equitable distribution can be quite confusing to people when they're first looking at it, but with a little bit of instruction and some advice, it becomes much easier to kind of understand what it is that the court's looking at when they're deciding what to do with the marital estate. And the marital estate is what equitable distribution is referring to, effectively the stuff, the assets and the liabilities of the marriage. So the way that the statute is written, that's 61075 of Florida statutes, is it sets out to have both parties to a marriage leave the marriage in an equitable manner. Now, this does not always mean equal. There are some bases under the statute for the court to distribute the assets or the liabilities between the parties unequally, and we can touch on why the court might think of doing that in a moment. To begin with, when looking at an analysis of what it is that the court's going to be dividing, two of the most important things that we need to know are when was the date of marriage and what is the date of separation. And you would not believe the number of people who don't know when they were married. So right off the bat, when you're coming to speak with an attorney, try and figure out what the date of your marriage was. From there, date of separation. That's one that seems at first blush to be simple, but sometimes there's some argument as to what that date should actually be. Sometimes it's when a party files for divorce, but in other circumstances, there's a situation where people have been living apart from each other for many years and have only filed for divorce after a period of time has passed. So it's not always quite so clear what the date of separation is, but generally it's the date of filing. However, there are some circumstances which the court may consider a different date. But in any event, date of marriage to date of separation, all the assets that were acquired during that time frame and all of the liabilities that were incurred during that time frame are in play. There's also some circumstances where non-marital assets, such as assets that were acquired during the marriage, might be in play. And one circumstance that you might find that is where one party owned a house before the marriage, but during the course of the marriage, the other party helped pay down the principal on the mortgage, or that party through financial contribution or marital effort helped increase the value of that property. So while the property itself may not be a marital asset, the appreciation or the pay down in the principal, that itself may be an asset to be distributed between the parties during the marriage. As I mentioned earlier, equitable doesn't always mean equal. Generally speaking, in most cases, that's what we're doing. We're taking the assets, passing them off to each party, taking the liabilities, passing them off to each party, and then trying to have the parties walk out with an equal valuation between the two of them. But there are some circumstances where the court finds a justification for an unequal distribution. One of the big ones is where one of the parties to a marriage has incurred debt fraudulently or outside the knowledge of the other party. And equitably speaking, the court doesn't find that one party should be saddled with debt that they had no idea was being incurred, did not consent to, did not play a part in. So that's a circumstance where you might find an unequal distribution of marital assets or liabilities. Two things I wanted to touch on really quick before I go are kind of sub areas of equitable distribution. One is partition. So what is partition? Partition is effectively where the court is going to force the sale of real property or real estate, you know, the marital home, or maybe sometimes there's some other rental properties owned by the parties. The court, if the court has jurisdiction because the real estate is within the jurisdiction of the court, they can force the parties to sell that property if the parties can't agree on how to distribute it between them. Another thing that comes up oftentimes in equitable distribution is what are we doing with the party's retirement? Because one of the concerns that I find a lot are when people are coming to me for a divorce, they haven't necessarily vested yet in their retirement, or they're not of a retirement age, which means for them to draw on their retirement, they're having to pay excessive taxes and penalties to pull from those accounts. Well, what we have in this state is what we call the Qualified Domestic Relations Order, or what we refer to as a quadro. And what a quadro does is it helps siphon off a portion of one party's retirement to the other party without incurring those taxes or penalties. So that's a way that we can divide up a retirement without the party who's got the account having to pay those taxes and penalties. In any event, dividing up the marital estate can oftentimes be confusing, but it doesn't need to be. If you've got an attorney who knows what they're doing, they can help walk you through the process in a way that you can understand exactly what it is that you're entitled to, as well as what your spouse is entitled to. Hope you're finding these videos helpful. Next week, we're going to talk about A for alimony. And before I go, one thing that you'll notice as I go through this series is each subsequent letter, part of that analysis is going to be based on what the court did on the previous letter. So next week, when we're talking about alimony, you're going to see that the court has to make a decision on equitable distribution before they can make a finding on alimony, and so on and so forth with child support and then everything else that comes from that. So if you're finding these videos helpful or interested in learning more, I hope that you click the link in the thing below. And if you have any other questions, please call us at the office. Check us out at mytampafirm.com. Thank you.